What should small-handed pianists do to get around on this instrument, to play fluently, to feel comfortable, and to avoid injury? This is a huge question. It's a huge, difficult issue, and I deal with it really every day here in my job because many of my students have fairly small hands. I don't actually have these big Scandinavian farmer hands, but any sort of human sympathy or empathy is going to make one very concerned about this issue when you watch somebody struggle even to reach an octave. So I have some thoughts about small-handed pianists, I guess presumptuously enough, advice coming from someone with large hands. First of all, so much of the literature contains what appear to be massive chords and passages and reaches and so on that are difficult or impossible with small hands. The Scriabin D-sharp minor etude, flying all over the piano with that left hand. How do you begin to get all those notes? Rachmaninoff, of course, is very famous for some tall chords, for sure. Even octaves, for example, tremolo bass octaves in Beethoven can pose a terrible problem for small-handed persons who have trouble reaching that interval. So it's really everywhere. The types of problems that we see with persons with small hands trying to deal with a keyboard, first of all, the big one is injury. That all of the stretching and the stress and the muscular tension and so on will lead to different types of injury. The most common types of injury, tendinitis, carpal tunnel, which is actually a form of tendinitis, but it's tendinitis in a particular place that has a special, extra difficult set of circumstances. Cubital tunnel is in the elbow. It's a tendon in the elbow that goes through there. And then very, very serious and getting a lot of new attention is focal dystonia. Focal dystonia is especially challenging because it's actually not a physical debilitation in the way we normally think about it. It's mental. The mind says, I am not going to allow you to do some of these motions anymore, and shuts them down from on the side of the brain, not on the side of the hands being injured. So focal dystonia is a huge challenge, and these are all fairly common in piano playing, unfortunately. So what can small-handed pianists do? Here are 5 ideas. First of all, accept the idea that if it hurts, it's wrong. This is a universal truth of piano playing. You cannot build any ability upon pain or upon physical stress. Ultimately, you will lose that battle. And pain at the piano is a message to you that something is not functioning properly. Like a weird noise from your engine, it's not going to just fix itself. It's not going to just work itself out and go away. It's going to get worse and worse until something blows. And that's really the same in piano playing. If it hurts, it's wrong. If you're feeling pain, tingling, numbness, if you keep going down that road, you're going to get a long-term injury, for sure. Okay? If it hurts, it's wrong. And I would even say if it's hard, it's wrong. If it doesn't feel easy and wonderful and kind of fun to do, it's wrong. And the reason is, you're just not going to do a good job of executing something stressful and unpleasant in a performance situation in front of others, while simultaneously sounding expressive and imaginative. Of course not. You're going to sound labored. You're going to sound stressed out. You're going to sound miserable. So piano technique must be free and easy and actually physically enjoyable. Okay, like running in a meadow, chasing butterflies or something. So if it hurts, it's wrong. That's number one. You have to accept this and become completely intolerant of pain and stress when you play in order to identify where it is and work on it. Okay, so that's number one. Number 2 is once you do that, you need to figure out what the adaptations are going to be for your particular case. In some cases, there are immediate adaptations that can ameliorate the problem. For example, redistribution. Does the left hand have to take all these notes, or can the right hand sneak in there and take a few? I just did a redistribution a couple days ago in a Scriabin etude. There's one little thing I couldn't quite get with the left hand. Turns out the right hand can sneak over there and take care of it. Am I worried I'm going to be caught? No. Why? Because there's no such thing as the piano police. So I'm not afraid of that. So make adaptations. They may be things like, I'm just going to say this, okay? Leave out notes, okay? Now someone will want to argue with that and be outraged about that. Which is worse? I left out 3 notes in Chopin, or I got long-term tendinitis. Which of those 2 things is worse? I will choose leaving out notes every single time, okay, for the betterment of my students, for their wellness. Sometimes you can just leave out notes. Nobody even notices. You can't hear the difference, and it's just fine. So yeah, absolutely teach this. I don't really have to do it very often myself. Again, I'm lucky with big hands, but I think very carefully about strategic ways of thinning out the texture when it's a matter of student wellness and student need. Yeah, you can leave out notes. Number 3, learn about historical performance. That is, how did they play back in the day when most of this music was actually written? Well, if you consult the earliest recordings and the scholarship on the subject, there was a lot of freedom for how they did it. A lot of breaking of chords, rolling of chords, just general attitude of freedom toward the score that is missing today, as we have this idea that everybody has to play it exactly the same way. I recommend especially a book by Kenneth Hamilton called After the Golden Age, which is a wonderful study of 19th century music making. So check that out. You may find ways, it'll just open up your mind about having different approaches to a musical score and maybe finding solutions that didn't occur to you before. Number 4, beware of orchestral reductions. An orchestral reduction is a piano version of an orchestra piece that is not really meant to be performed on piano. It's just for rehearsal purposes. So the accompaniment to a concerto is a great example. The piano score of a musical is another good example. They can be very playable and intelligently written, but you cannot take that for granted. In many cases, the reduction is done by some kind of copyist or other person who is not the one who has to play it. And what they really do, in many cases, is they just literally move everything that the orchestra does, all the tremolos of the violins, and all the trills of the winds, and all the this and that of the brass, and the whatever of the percussion, and they just stack it all up in this unplayable mess in the piano. And they're just absolutely terrible. They don't even sound good. A really common one would, if the strings are all playing single notes, just back and forth. Da, 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 da. So let's say it's an E-flat major chord. You have first violins, second violins, violas, and cellos playing these, and they're all going, da, 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 they're all playing one note. Well, on the piano, that turns into 16th note chords. And so you have these handfuls of big wide chords repeated over and over and over and over again for many measures. Think about that in a small hand. Think about what that's going to feel like, kind of clenching and trying to do that. It's a terrible idea. So watch out for them and feel very, very free to make radical alterations to make it playable. Don't assume that there's any kind of knowledge or authority or musical intelligence behind orchestral reduction, because there may not be. And I often have seen pianists get injured because they felt obligated to play every note of some terrible, ignorant orchestral reduction. Number 5 is actively learn good principles of piano technique. So many pianists don't have a systematic approach. They don't have a philosophy. They don't have an understanding of how this stuff works. They just go to the piano and just kind of try. And it's like, if I don't know how doorknobs work and I need to get out of the room, I'm just going to go to the door and start bashing around it, knock my head into it, run across the room and charge into it, throw a chair at it. There are all these ways I can try. Can I eventually get out of this room if I do that? Well, maybe if I throw that piano bench at that window, I might eventually get out. But there's a much, much easier way to do this, much quicker, much less destruction, if I just know how doorknobs work. The same is true of piano technique. If you understand the principles of how it works, you don't have to do this painful trial and error, and instead you can solve problems much, much more quickly. So learn principles of piano technique and get help if you need it. And that includes a knowledgeable teacher or a course in piano technique that can explain all of these principles. By the way, I will recommend a book. It's called Adaptive Strategies for the Small-Handed Pianist, printed by my same publisher, Oxford University Press. The funny thing about it, everything in there is stuff I would do with my big hands. There's really nothing in there that I wouldn't also take advantage of. Because again, we're all kind of small-handed pianists, and even if I don't feel the stretch when it's a fourth, I'm going to feel it when it's a sixth or a ninth. Eventually, right? The same thing's going to happen. I'm going to take advantage of the same ideas. So adaptive strategies for the small-handed pianist. I really recommend that. I'll also mention my courses on Improv Planet, the 4 pillars of piano technique. I recommend that as a systematic approach to understanding piano technique. Further, I'm a big fan of anybody who takes physiology, human physiology, seriously at the piano. So that means Taubman, the Taubman techniques, Golansky, Feldenkrais. Anybody who says, let's look at how the hand and the arm really works and what has to be done at the piano, and let's take that seriously and develop technique out of that. I'm friends with whoever is going to do that. I'm enemies with anyone who's going to say, the human is a machine and you can just push it by isolating the fingers and getting them to work like little machines. Anyone who does that is my enemy, and I will argue against them. So, small-handed pianists, make sure you are using good principles of piano technique.